Hello, hello. Welcome to Courage Becomes Her, where we connect and share real life stories. I'll talk with women whom I love and I'm inspired by, women who are experiencing life just like you and me. I'm excited for us to gather together and cultivate confidence, courage, and joy in life and work.
As I started to sort of move from that season defined by pain into a little bit more breakthrough and joy, I realized I was incredibly hesitant to embrace it. Because sometimes when you've experienced loss or heartache or trauma of any kind, it can be easier not to hold that joy than to hold something that might break.
That was Nicole Zazowski. Nicole is a Pacific Northwest gal who has made her home on the Connecticut coastline with her husband and her 3 kids, 2 years old, 3 years old, and 7 years old. Nicole is an author and a speaker and a licensed marriage and family therapist. I asked Nicole to join us for this episode of Courage Becomes Her to talk about therapy and counseling. And one of the reasons that I did is because I hear so often in my coaching conversations about the benefits of therapy and why would I actually go to a therapist? And, I have you, Laurel, as my coach, but why would I need an actual therapist? And kind of concerns around that and unknowns around that. So in this conversation with Nicole, she helps us to kind of unpack what it looks like to undergo counseling and therapy, how she's utilized it in her own life as a recipient, as well as what it looks like for her practices as a therapist. She talks about how we can take steps toward restoration and wellness through stewarding our hearts and our emotions while through therapy. It's just such a helpful conversation to really understand, why would I not just go and chat with a friend or a family member, but why would I actually invite, a therapist into something that I'm going through? So I'm really grateful for her to open up about that and talk about that with us. I also invited her on because I recently read her book, What If It's Wonderful? And so many of the themes in it resonated with things that come up in coaching often, like I just am waiting for the other shoe to drop. This kind of constant what-ifing scenarios and just looking at things like just expecting the next bad thing to happen. And this book that she's written is just so lovely because it presents us with this question of, instead of doing a pessimistic, the sky is falling, what if question, it's what if it's wonderful? What if it actually is joyful and celebratory? And she just does such a great job of really helping us to discover joy and celebration and the need to be intentional about practicing and cultivating joy and celebration in our lives. So I'm really excited for you to listen in to today's conversation with Nicole. Nicole, thank you so much for coming on with me today for Courage Becomes Her. I'm delighted to have you join us.
Oh, I am so excited for this conversation. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so I think a lot of my friends and listeners maybe don't know you, so let's get to know you a little bit. So let's start with, where's home?
Oh, such a loaded question, although
it is
maybe was intended to be simple. I live in Connecticut, just outside New York City, with my husband and 3 young children, 2 sons and a daughter. I was born and raised in the Pacific Northwest, and I think I will always have that in my blood. So this is definitely home here in Connecticut. I have fallen in love with living here. It's where my family is, but I've got some Pacific Northwest in my blood still.
Yeah, for sure. And you've got some good Southern California roots too.
I do. All of my schooling and training years were there, so lots of fun memories in the Los Angeles area too.
Yeah. Oh, good. All right. What's your love language?
I think definitely probably words of affirmation would be number one. I am a physical touch person too. So I am very touchy feely. I love
Okay.
hugs. Yeah. So that would be a close second.
Sounds good. And what about your Enneagram?
Oh man, this this is my lifelong debate. I can never decide whether I am a two with a very strong three wing, or a three with a very strong two wing.
Okay.
I go back and forth, and I love it when readers read my book and reach out and say, "Are you this?"
Yes. Yeah.
And I am not somebody who minds being diagnosed by other people. So if you read What If It's Wonderful and you've got ideas on that, feel free to reach out.
Sounds good. Yeah, that's so good that you said that because actually when I read it, I thought it could definitely be either way for you. So,
Okay,
but I'm
interesting.
not an
Okay, that's
Enneagram
helpful.
expert,
That's
but
helpful.
that so good. Okay, so speaking of books, what's a book that has transformed your life?
Mm, goodness, I am a reader, so there are so many. I would say, as a lifelong transformational book, the Bible Recap,
Mm,
which is by Tara-Leigh Coble or Cobble, and it's more of a commentary, but a very, very accessible commentary for anyone.
wow.
So it's not super heady or academic, but it has just really deepened my Bible study. And it's simple, it's accessible, it's not super lengthy. So that is not your typical book, but
Yeah.
it is so transformational for me. I would say I am reading The Choice
Okay.
right now, and I am not done with it, but just there's three E's in her name, Dr. Edith Ager, but there's another one in there. And I mean, just her story of surviving the
Mm-hmm.
Holocaust
Yeah.
and becoming one of the world's leading trauma
Yeah.
clinicians, and just leveraging her story
Mm,
and just that idea of choosing and the empowerment we have. We don't always get to choose our story or the pain
yeah.
that comes with it, but we do get to choose how we steward that pain. And
Mm.
goodness, just a remarkable story of somebody who stewarded their trauma really, really well.
Yeah. Yeah. I've seen an interview with her and she's just absolutely incredible.
Amazing, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, so good. Thank you. Okay, how
Yeah.
about movie or show that you've watched in the last year? Best movie or show?
Oh, that I've watched in the last year. I do love to go to the movies, and I'm waiting for more options to return to theaters.
Yes.
Um, because that's an experience I really enjoy. In terms of, so I would say I've watched more shows in this last year
Yeah.
just because of what's being made and put out there. I do love Yellowstone, and
Okay.
and maybe that's top of mind because I'm watching the newest season right now. But
Yeah.
it's a very good show.
Okay. Yeah, I haven't watched that one yet, but I have heard multiple people comment that it's a really
Yeah,
good one.
not for the faint of heart. I mean, it
Sure.
is a brutal, brutal watch. I will warn people about
Yeah.
that if you're not familiar, but the acting and the storyline, and oh my goodness, the scenery. I
Mm,
think it's filmed in Montana. It takes place in Wyoming. I think most of it is filmed in Montana, but oh my goodness,
okay.
so beautiful.
Yeah, absolutely. So good. Okay, what has made you laugh or filled your cup in the last 24 hours or so?
Okay, this is a fun one, because yesterday my husband and I drove to Boston for dinner and back in
Wow.
one night. So it was like 6 hours of driving. But our friends moved from our little town here in Connecticut to Boston in May. And we just thought, you know what? If we're going to invest in this friendship and make it happen, we got to do stuff like this.
Mm,
So
mm,
our dinner with them was filled with laughter and so much fun. Just
good.
to see them in person was great.
Mm, that's so good. And that is the era that we live in, right? Of so many of us, our friends don't live in the same cities or even the
Yeah,
same state that we live in. And that does require intentionality. So I
for
love that.
sure.
Yeah, so good. Okay, current obsession, any genre.
Ugh. I do have a couple products that just I feel like daily save my life, even though they're small. One is it's a Kleenex box, but it's slightly wider than a paper towel roll, but it's meant to fit in your cup holder in your car.
Oh, okay. Yep.
And in this, I mean, I have a 7-year old, a 3-year old, and an almost 2-year old.
Yep.
And my own nose is constantly dripping in the Connecticut weather.
Yes.
It's just
Yep.
nice to have that right in your
That's
car, right in
great.
your cup holder. It's not falling on the floor because it doesn't fit anywhere.
Yeah.
That is wonderful. And I also have these shower tablets. They're a bit like bath bombs. They serve the same purpose, but you throw them in the bottom of your shower. And I love the eucalyptus ones,
I
but the
love those
steam and
too.
everything,
Yeah.
it just
Yeah.
makes you feel like you're at a spa for
Yeah.
a very small fraction of the cost.
Right. Yeah. Especially as a mom of three, I'm sure your showers
Yes.
aren't very long. So a little
No,
bit of luxury it sounds fabulous.
exactly.
So good. All right. What was the first concert you ever went to?
I think Amy Grant.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
going it way back, but
I love
I
that.
think it
Yeah.
was an Amy Grant Christmas concert.
Okay. Yeah. That
Um,
Amy Grant was my first concert as well.
Really?
Yeah. My
Oh, that's
dad
so
took me
fun.
to see her at the county fair. So,
Oh,
yeah.
I
Yeah.
still love her.
Me too. Absolutely.
The
So
best.
good. Oh, I love it. Okay, so I asked you to join me today to talk about counseling and therapy, and you are a licensed marriage and family therapist. How long have you been doing that for?
Oh, what a great question. I have been practicing for almost 13 years.
Okay, yeah, that's a while, and you've
Yes.
lived through the pandemic with it as
Oh, yes.
well.
Yes. That
A
was a
whole
unique season.
Yes, absolutely. Oh my goodness. So, one of the things that I've seen through 10 years now of coaching women is just a real struggle for a lot of women to embrace the idea of maybe counseling or therapy would be helpful for them, and that, at whatever journey or stage of their journey that they're at. So, talk a little bit about kind of just your heart behind therapy and why you got in it to begin with, and then kind of maybe bridge into, how that can be, how, like, what the benefits are of therapy and how you would help someone embrace kind of, going to therapy.
Sure. Um, I have always loved people's stories, and I noticed from a young age that even if a certain behavior wouldn't be considered okay or was hurtful maybe toward me, I've always recognized that all behavior makes sense in the context of story. That there's a reason that we feel the way we do and a reason that we do the things we do when we're in pain. And so I love understanding people's stories and how they've arrived at their place today. And I studied abroad my entire sophomore year of college. So I was gone the whole academic year. And our situation was a bit unique at my university, where we stayed with 50 college students in one house.
Wow.
So it wasn't a homestay program. It was a little bit like a co-ed fraternity or sorority house,
Yeah.
a large house with lots of bedrooms. And a faculty family also lived in the house with us for the year. And so just during that year, I loved understanding people's stories. I feel like living with the same 50 students just opened up different kinds of conversations than I had
Mm.
had my freshman year when it was a typical dorm
Wow.
situation. And so also and this was before technology was made communication back in the States super easy. So we
Mm.
had Skype, but even that was really imperfect in terms of being able to reach our families back home and friends. And so we really had to lean on each other in different
Mm.
ways than we typically would have. And that just opened up different kinds of conversations. And at the very end of the year, I think it may have been the last day that we were in Germany where I was studying, the wife from the faculty family took me out to coffee, and she said, "Are you sure you don't want to be a therapist?" She had just been observing me all year, and
Wow.
I'm to this day, she claims she's never done that with anybody. She doesn't like to intrude on people's journeys in that specific way, but I'm really
Oh,
grateful she did. God used her to, I think, turn the lights on to some of my
mm,
gifting that I didn't really realize was there or just took for granted.
yeah.
And I never looked back. I applied to Fuller Theological Seminary for my marriage and family therapy, and that began my journey as a therapist.
Mm,
And my philosophy around that, I think a good therapist meets you where you are
mm,
and gently leads you to new places. So it would be a tragedy to me if I simply joined with someone where they are and sat with them in that
mm-hmm,
place,
mm-hmm.
but didn't illuminate areas where someone could grow or didn't challenge them forward to new places.
Yeah.
Likewise, it would be a tragedy to me if I was always pushing the leading edge of growth and hadn't really identified the pain and sat with
Mm,
them in that place first. You have to meet somebody where they are if you want to help them move.
mm,
And so, from a 30,000-foot view perspective, that would be my philosophy is
yeah.
somebody that you can good therapist is somebody that joins you where you are, meets you where you are, helps you understand how you got there,
Yeah.
but doesn't very, very, in a very loving way, doesn't let you stay there.
Yeah. That's so good. I think pain is such an interesting word in our society. And I think it's something that, and obviously you know way more about this than I do, but I see it so much that we don't really understand our pain. We don't really know how to hold our pain or
Yeah.
even how to name it. So for someone who is thinking like, I don't even know how I'm feeling. I don't know if this feeling that I'm feeling is pain or what I'm experiencing is pain. Like, how do we even figure that out? Like,
Mhm. It's a really good question. And I think that typical question of how do you feel or how did that make you feel, sort
mm,
of the building block therapy question that we tend to think of. I appreciate it, but I think we can do better in terms of identifying what it is exactly that we feel. So
mm,
pain comes from two different directions. A violation of love will inform our identity in a painful way.
mm-hmm,
So identity feelings might be worthless, not good enough, inadequate, unloved. Those are all related to pain around who we are as a
mm,
person and our value.
mm-hmm,
The other direction is a violation of trust within which informs whether or not we are safe.
mm,
So some feelings in that vein would be, for example, powerless, unsafe, helpless, alone,
mm.
anything that informs our sense of safety.
Wow.
And different stories might have violations in either one of those two
Mm-hmm,
directions. Sometimes somebody's really strong in one and or really strong in another, or sometimes it's a combination of the
mm-hmm,
two. But those are
mm.
the two directions that pain can come from. And
Wow.
so questions that are born from that understanding, let's say you recall a memory of a conversation you had with a parent that really made it a painful impression on you, and you're not sure exactly what it is that you
Mm-hmm,
feel. Being able to ask a question like, what did that conversation say about my value?
mm,
Or what did that conversation, how did it make me feel about myself?
mm,
That will yield a much more specific answer than how do you feel, which typically and understandably yields answers like, well, bad or not good.
yeah. Yeah.
But if you can understand how you felt in terms of your sense of identity and
Mm,
your sense of safety, then you've opened up a whole world to yourself. Because here's the deal: we cannot speak truth to our feelings unless we know what those feelings are.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So often people will try to make themselves feel better and say, I just remember that I'm loved, or that God loves me, or that I have a purpose. Everybody has a purpose. Well, if your story has led you to a place where you've really been wounded in, let's say, powerlessness, and you just felt like nothing you did could affect any kind of change, it is absolutely true that you are loved and have
Mm-hmm.
purpose.
Mm-hmm.
But it is not going to be a very powerful message to that wound that tells you that you're powerless and unable to affect any kind of change in your life. And so it's important that when we speak truth, it's speaking directly to the pain that we feel.
Mm-hmm.
In turn, it's important to understand not just our feelings, but what we've learned to do to protect ourselves. And this is where people might feel some fear around counseling, because nothing we do in reaction to our pain is attractive behavior. Like
Yeah.
these are not helpful or healthy things that we do, and certainly not our favorite parts of ourselves.
Yeah.
But when you understand it in the context of, oh, maybe those behaviors were necessary,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe you had to hide in the closet every time your parents were screaming at each other because that was the only way that you could get out of the way and protect yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I certainly understand when conflict comes up in your adult life that you just avoid it.
Yeah.
You go into the other room, you leave the house, you shut down emotionally.
Yeah.
What was once protection in our early years
Mm-hmm.
is a barrier to meaning and connection now. And
Mm-hmm.
so while it's understandable, being able to speak truth to that feeling and say, oh, I don't have to do that anymore. I don't have to hide, for example. This is what I'm going to do instead.
Yeah.
So this is all based on a model I use in my practice called restoration therapy.
Yeah.
But that was a very long answer to your
No,
question.
I love that. Yeah, no, that's so good for sure. Friends, I know you are enjoying this conversation with Nicole just as much as I am, but I just want to pop in super quick with two quick things. The first one is Nicole and I are giving away 2 copies of her new book, What If It's Wonderful? So head on over to my Instagram page to be entered in to win one of those copies. It's Instagram and just Laurel Emory. So look forward to you participating and joining us for that giveaway, and so grateful that we can do that. And second is for those of you who listened to episode 10, where I talked about my coaching and what I do in coaching. You know that I offered some complimentary coaching consultations, and I still have 2 of those available before the end of this year. So I would love to gift that to 2 of you. So please reach out to me either through social media or email me, laurel@laurelemory.com. I look forward to hearing from you and enjoy the rest of this conversation. So one of the things that I really appreciate about you and your methodology and how you come across is that you don't claim to have it all together and to be this perfect therapist, and so I think that to me is just so permission giving to the rest of us to be able to say, like, no, there is a lot of pain in life, and that doesn't mean that there's something wrong with you, that's normal for all of us, if you will. So kind of just speak to that a little bit of kind of your journey and how you, I don't know if you've always been that way or if there was something that kind of crossed over for you to say, no, I want to show up, authentically. Yeah. And, even though I do this as my profession, I don't want people to think that, I'm perfect or I've got it all figured out.
Absolutely. I practice restoration therapy as a therapist, and I practice it in my own life. Mm-hmm. And my husband and I practice it in our marriage. Mm-hmm. And hopefully we're giving our kids language to practice it in their own lives in an elementary way at this point. I have studied a lot, but change is hard.
Mm,
And I am a human being who will forever be in need of growth.
mm,
Um, and this is a practice. This is not a place of arrival.
mm-hmm.
And that's not to say that once one starts therapy, they have to be in therapy weekly for the rest of their lives.
Sure.
But I do, by the way, go in and out of seasons of seeing someone as well.
Mm-hmm.
That I just find it really helpful to sit with somebody else with a different perspective who's not a character in my everyday life and have them hold up the mirror to ways that I might need to grow.
Mm-hmm.
And I see that as an opportunity for me, and hopefully
Yep.
my clients experience the same. And I say this with my writing too. I even like to write from, yes, both the podium, in that I've studied some things that I think are really helpful to me and hope they're helpful to
Mm-hmm.
other people,
Yeah.
but also from the mud pit. And I tell a lot of vulnerable stories
Yeah.
about how I practice this, how I practice it and fail, how I, ignored what I knew to be true because it felt so good to react to that feeling instead
Mm.
of tell myself the truth in that moment and regulate that emotion. Change is just as hard for me as it is for anyone else.
Yeah.
And so hopefully my clients and readers experience me coming alongside them for the journey, and not somebody who's up on a mountaintop telling everybody else how to get there.
Sure. Yeah. Oh, that's so good.
Yeah.
Okay. So one of the things, and you kind of alluded to it a little bit, but there seems like there are points in time when our friends and our family can speak into our situations and, help us to speak truths to ourselves. But then there are other times when we really do need, that professional insight. So if someone is maybe kind of struggling to figure out, how to determine that, like, how do I know when this is a situation where I, want to invite a professional in? Like, what advice would you give them, or suggestions would you give them?
That's a great question. I think both are good. They're just different.
Mm,
And so, I mean, certainly your friends and family, as they should, know you in the context of your environment,
yeah.
and they have a special relationship with you where, again, as it should, it's not a bad thing, but that's going to color the way that they see a certain situation
Hmm.
or a way that they see you.
Yeah.
And I think if you're recognizing an area that you might like to grow in, or you're struggling with a relationship in your life, or maybe you're not even recognizing the feeling, but you're seeing this pattern of behavior.
Hmm.
Sometimes we see the tip of the iceberg,
Yeah.
or we understand that there's something going on under the waterline. So to be able to see that behavior and say, huh, that behavior is always 100% of the time rooted in pain.
Yeah.
And so let me explore what that pain is. I think there's also just a confidentiality and a structure around therapy
Mm.
that creates some safety that we
Yeah.
may or may not appreciate, but is there all the same. I think,
Yeah.
even things like paying a fee, or having those 50 minutes or however long your
Yeah.
sessions are, of defined time, an appointment, going to a certain place that you don't go to any other time,
Yeah.
and being able to close the door and walk away and leave it
Hmm.
there.
Hmm.
I think we can't underestimate the safety of the structure of a therapy setting, that's very intentional
That's
on the
good.
part of the therapist, and it's confidential.
Yeah. Oh, that's so great. I really appreciate that. For someone who maybe is interested but has no idea, like, how does someone find a counselor? Like, for me, I've had the same woman as my counselor therapist for 12 years, and
Yeah.
I so came about because of a women's event that I went to,
Uh-huh.
and that sort of thing. So there are so many options, I think, available today from an online perspective, through health insurance plans, et cetera. So how do you typically, recommend that someone find someone?
Yes. I think good places to start are personal referrals,
Yeah.
1 degree removed. Certainly, if anything has resonated in this conversation that you're listening to, there's a website that is related to the model I practice called
Okay.
restorationtherapytraining.com. And they have a listing of therapists who are trained in this model by state.
Great.
We are, most therapists, with the exception of someone who's a coach, as you're familiar with, we are limited to the state that we are licensed in.
Uh-huh.
So I cannot technically see anybody outside of Connecticut
Yeah.
because that's where I'm licensed. But I won't speak for all degrees in every profession. I think most churches keep a list of people
Okay.
that they trust
Great.
because they aren't always able to do that work themselves, but
Yeah.
get a ton of people asking them for that
Yeah.
kind of support. And so they keep a list. I think if you're comfortable, certain friends might know of somebody that either they see or is 1 more degree removed, or maybe has a friend that's a therapist that,
Yes.
yeah. So I think those are good places to start. Certainly, I've heard amazing stories of people finding someone online as well. I just think it's a little bit harder if there's not that personal referral.
Yeah. Yeah. Great. I would agree with that. That's really helpful for sure.
Or hearing somebody speak like you did,
Yes. Yeah.
going to events, and often they're speaking in part because they want to let people know that they're there and
Yeah.
available. And so
Yeah.
that's also a great resource.
Yeah. Good. Okay, switching gears a little bit. I know that you are a big proponent and believer in choosing joy and inviting celebration. Like those are things that you talk, well, the whole, I guess, theme of your newest book. So, talk a little bit about kind of your journey of really having those be kind of cornerstones for you.
Yeah, so most people thought that I wrote What If It's Wonderful because I had a ton of things to say about joy. I was really great at practicing celebration. And you know where I'm going with this. I was definitely not. That book was much more born out of a season that could largely be characterized by change and loss.
Mm.
And one of the things I noticed as I started to, I don't think our seasons are ever all pain or all joy,
Hmm.
but I think certainly they lean in one direction or another a lot of the time. And as I started to sort of move from that season defined by pain into a little bit more breakthrough and joy, I realized I was incredibly hesitant to
Mm.
embrace it. Because sometimes when you've experienced loss or heartache or trauma of any kind, it can be easier not to hold that joy than to hold something that might break.
Yeah.
And it was on paper very joyful and wonderful. And I did experience some of that, but it was also really terrifying to me.
Mm. Mm.
And that got me really curious about what I now know is the most vulnerable feeling we feel is joy.
Yeah.
Because when you hold something, it is automatically accompanied by the possibility of loss.
Yeah.
And so I started to look into celebration, and I had always seen celebration on the far side of a goal achieved or a dream realized or some sort of shift in my circumstances. And I would get really anxious around transitions, especially transitions like a new year, where everybody's
Mm.
talking about their hopes and dreams for the year ahead. And I would just feel terrified. Like,
Mm.
what if I don't have a reason to celebrate? What if I don't get to enjoy a reward for an accomplishment because I fail?
Wow.
I saw it as a reaction to good news or a reward for some sort of accomplishment. And then in my research, both biblical and psychological research, I learned that much more than a reward or a reaction, celebration is a rhythm. It's a
Mm.
practice that helps us cultivate more joy in the life that we're already living. And at first I was super annoyed by that finding because I thought, goodness gracious, like there are so many things in life that require discipline. Why does joy and celebration have to be another one?
Yeah.
And then I realized how empowering that was,
Yeah.
that these are practices that are simple and accessible no matter what kind of season you're living. And to be clear, when I say choose joy, I am not speaking of that from a toxically positive perspective where
Yes.
we just ignore the pain and choose something different. No,
Yeah.
this is practicing celebration in the midst of sometimes a really painful season
Yeah.
as a way that helps us heal and move through, not something that takes us out of it
Mm.
or numbs it in some
Yeah.
way.
Mm.
And it really has changed my life. My
Mm.
life has not been perfect since I emerged from that season of pain.
Mm-hmm.
I've entered other seasons of pain and other seasons
Mm-hmm.
of joy, but this practice of celebration has been the through line.
Mm.
And I outline a lot of them in the book.
Mm-hmm.
But it really has changed my heart and changed my relationships.
Mm.
And even just the question, which is the title of my book, what if it's wonderful?
Yeah.
Like I find myself asking that going into a new year as you and I record
Mm-hmm.
this.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, it's a time of year that would historically make me very anxious.
Mm.
And just saying, hey, what if it's wonderful?
Mm.
What if there's a lot of goodness in whatever waits for me, whether that's growth in my own heart or something that brings me joy? Like, what if? And that's a very different what if question than I had a tendency to ask, which were more,
Yes.
what if I fail or what if I'm disappointed? That's just a question that really interrupts that line of thinking and pivots me toward a healthier perspective.
Yeah. Oh, that's so good. That's such a beautiful starting place, I think, for most people, because we do have that tendency to ask
Oh,
ourselves these
yeah.
what ifs, and they always are the negatives. So, yeah.
Yeah. And that was what was so interesting to me. I thought I was the only one. And then I learned about so many dynamics in the brain that
Oh,
are fighting against us experiencing joy. Like left on neutral, our brain will lean negative, not
yeah.
just because of one phenomenon, but several. And I talk about those in the book too. But that was just so interesting to me that we are not fighting on neutral ground, but also if we do nothing, that is where we go. So we need practices to help steer us toward joy.
Yeah. Oh, so good. I really appreciate that and love that. Thank you so much.
Of
Okay.
course.
Any closing thoughts, final thought for the women who are joining us today?
Oh, I guess one would be as I think about hope and joy, if that is not where you are, it's okay to be where you are.
Mm-hmm.
And that those practices are a starting place and they are meant to move you forward. But if that feels like so foreign to where you are right now, don't be discouraged by that.
Mm.
That this is a message for you where you are right now.
Yeah.
Not intended to yank you out of that place, but intended to sit with you and maybe move you forward just a little bit, even if it's 1 inch at a time.
That's right. Oh, so good. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for
Thanks for
your
having me. This
wisdom.
was a
Yeah.
pleasure.
Yes, indeed. Indeed. So grateful for you. So thank you.
Thank you.
I am so grateful for today's conversation with Nicole. Gosh, what a blessing and a gift to have her join us. And I'll tell you what, that last part that she shared about for some of us being in that season of just an inch at a time, that resonates so strongly with me. The last year and a half has been a really hard season in my life. Truly, honestly, the hardest season ever of my life. And there have been moments where the days have just felt like there's nothing worth celebrating or being joyful about. And so just looking at those little things, the little tiny wins is so good and so helpful. One of the chapters in her book talks about just savoring, practicing savoring, kind of any of those little things and slowing down. And that has been a gift to me over this season. And I know that many of you are there as well. I want to read just one piece from that chapter. It says, "The present moment is worthy even if we have nothing to show for it. No check marks by the items on our to-do list, no additional money in our bank account, and no emails cleared from our inbox." Gosh, that is so good, that it is worthy even if there's nothing to show for it, even if there's no productivity, which is so hard in our culture, but is just such a good reminder for us to be able to just be present, be in the moment, and to savor just, whatever it may be. For me, it's being able to hear the ocean waves crashing, or curling up with the cats on the couch, just, little things like that are just so meaningful in difficult seasons. So I resonate with what Nicole said. And if that is where you find yourself, especially in the midst of the holiday season, I just ask you to just take care of you and to not ask more of yourself than really what you can give at this moment, and just really pay attention to what your heart needs in this season. So thanks so much for joining me for today's conversation. Take care. What an honor to help you to cultivate confidence, courage, and joy in your life and work. Thank you so much for inviting me to journey with you. I look forward to being back with you next week, where we'll hear another story from a woman whom I love and am inspired by and look forward to learning from.